Radio Row at Super Bowl 60, and everyone's talking about Lane Kiffin. We'll give you a sampling of what they said. It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts. Of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe as always. One of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you for watching on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Hey, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. We put the same drive in every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work that defines you. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. So here at Super Bowl 60 Radio Row this week in San Francisco, and naturally, if you're not familiar with how Radio Row works here, it's everyone who has anything to say in the sports world sort of descends upon the Super Bowl and makes themselves available on Radio Row. And a lot of folks were talking about Lane Kiffin. So I want you to hear what guys like Ryan Leaf, Rick Neuheisel, Evan Cohen from ESPN Radio, Fred Smoot, former Mississippi State alum, what these folks had to say about Lane Kiffin. All very interesting from different angles. We're going to get into all that. But just understand that while it's the Super Bowl, and certainly the focus is on the Patriots and the Seahawks, most everybody that comes to Radio Row is something they're trying to promote. A podcast, a show, a product, a company, a business, a documentary, is something. And so the way Radio Row works is all of these people have handlers that manage their schedule. And so as a credentialed member of the media on Radio Row, you get all these emails for the weeks leading up to the Super Bowl from folks who will say, would you be interested in speaking with Marshall Falk or Donovan McNabb or Henry Cejudo or Ryan Leaf or whoever on behalf of X, right? And the trade is you talk to them for 10 minutes and they do 9 minutes of sports and whatever you want to talk about. In the 1 minute, they get to plug the thing that they're doing. Fine. So a lot of times these conversations don't have anything to do with the Super Bowl, which is actually a really good thing because in this year in particular, I mean, I'm based in Louisiana for my radio show, and obviously we're doing Locked on LSU here. And I mean, look, there's LSU ties with 5 LSU players playing in this game, but by and large, I think my audience isn't diving deep into the Super Bowl, the X's and O's of Super Bowl 60. But you come to Radio Row for the opportunity to have access to all these incredible people. And when every single person that sits down at my table for an interview finds out we're Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Lafayette and Lake Charles and Alexandria, and we're Louisiana based, every person, to a man or a woman, the conversation inevitably defaults to Lane Kiffin. And maybe the most fascinating conversation I've had so far this week is with Ryan Leaf. Yes, that Ryan Leaf. The Ryan Leaf that brought Washington State to the Rose Bowl. The Ryan Leaf who was the number 2 overall pick in the draft. The Ryan Leaf who many consider the biggest bust in NFL history, maybe before Jamarcus. The Ryan Leaf who went to federal prison. The Ryan Leaf who has reformed his life and is now an incredible advocate for the Menninger Clinic in Houston for people with mental disorders or battling any type of mental stress. That Ryan Leaf, who's an amazing comeback story, working for ESPN, calling games, all that sort of stuff. Ryan Leaf actually has some interesting ties with LSU and with Lane Kiffin. So coaches call on Ryan Leaf to come speak to their team to give an inspirational message. Brian Kelly had Ryan Leaf in Baton Rouge before the 2025 season. Lane Kiffin first called Ryan Leaf when he was at FAU and had him come talk to his teams at FAU. He's also had his teams had Leaf talk to his teams at Ole Miss. So Leaf and Kiffin have had a relationship for about 10 years now, a professional relationship. And so I asked Ryan Leaf, again, you can say what you will about Leaf and his professional career not working out the way that you might have thought. But what's undeniable is this was a dude that was an elite level quarterback. He went to a Rose Bowl at Washington State, was the number 2 pick in the draft. Like, it didn't work, but he's still an undeniable, like, A+ alpha physical specimen, all that sort of stuff. And I asked Ryan Leaf about Lane Kiffin and why that offense of Lane Kiffin could work.
Genius.
Why do you say,
genius.
like, I think we throw that word around a lot, but I think it carries more gravitas coming from you.
Yeah, because I think he's so inventive. It hasn't shifted. Like, you know, he was a guy that did some really interesting things, but he had super talented people at USC and at Alabama when he was the offensive coordinator. Then he gets to Florida Atlantic and he still wins, right? He develops, he brings in the right players. I mean, look, he went and got the running back that ultimately in Judkins and should have been freshman of the year, I think, the way he played against I called the game Ole Miss versus Texas A&M down in College Station where they both, Achane and him, went head-to-head. It was such a good one. And he's just been able to find the right fit. He knows the players that are going to be right for what he does, and so he's gone about that. And now he's going to have a free-for-all at LSU with the cupboard being able to be used for that aspect of things.
Ryan Leaf called Lane Kiffin a genius, an offensive genius for how creative he is. And it was so interesting hearing him connect the dots to say Kiffin, when the cupboard was full at SC and Alabama, had these great offenses. Well, it carried over at FAU. It carried over at Ole Miss. And it's going to carry over at LSU. Because the truth is with Lane Kiffin, everywhere he has gone, offenses follow. We had this conversation last week when we talked about Charlie Weiss. And it's no disrespect to Charlie Weiss to say two things can be true at the same time. Weiss can make the LSU offense better, but also true is that if Weiss were to leave and go to the NFL, the expectation is the offense would still continue to flow because of Lane Kiffin, because everywhere Kiffin has been, offense has followed. Now, the other thing that Leaf said I thought was really interesting, I asked him about Sam Leavitt. Now, Leaf being a guy who's coaching in Texas, who played at Washington State, the Pac-12, covers and calls Pac-12 games as well. Now, obviously, Arizona State's now in the Big 12, but a former life. I asked him his thoughts on Sam Leavitt. He has not called a game that Sam Leavitt played at Arizona State, but has a great awareness of Sam Leavitt and what he could be in Kiffin's offense.
I think that they were going to go after who Lane thought was going to be the best dual threat quarterback he could. Now, listen. Simmons was going to be the guy this year if he doesn't get hurt. Yeah. No one's ever heard of Trinidad Trambless, maybe.
You're right.
So you just never know how that's going to go. He recruits to a special type of offense he wants to run. I think the offense would have looked a lot different if Simmons would have been the starter the entire year, because I do think his legs would have been more of an advantage than maybe Chambliss's was. But it worked out for the best. And the fact that you bring in a guy that is incredibly gifted as an athlete to have that dual threat, I think you've put LSU in a really good position. Last year's offense was just there was no identity to it, and I wanted them to be successful so much, and Garrett to throw it all over the yard, but then be physical. They just couldn't run the football, and they didn't have no identity behind it. And the defense was finally good enough to be a difference maker, but you just left them on the field too long, And so I don't think Lane's going to have that problem. I think he's going to have the fact that he was able to keep Bacon as defensive coordinator is a big deal.
Yeah.
So he's talking about Blake Baker. I think he combined Blake and Baker and came out Bacon, but you understand what he's saying. Like, keeping Blake Baker is a big deal. We all agree with that. But, that was an interesting point about bringing in Leavitt for the dual threat capabilities, which is something that you had with Jaden Daniels, you didn't have with Garrett Nussmeier. When your running game stalled, the quarterback wasn't there to bail that offense out. You should have that with Leavitt, Husan Longstreet, Landon Clark, whoever's playing quarterback in the Lane Kiffin offense. Interesting convo there with Ryan Leaf. If you want to get that full convo, by the way, if you go to podcast or YouTube, just search After Further Review or AFR LSU, you get the full convo with Ryan Leaf. Ryan Leaf wasn't the only one. I want to let you hear from Evan Cohen from ESPN Radio with a decade-old conversation with Lane Kiffin that became awkward. Former first-round pick out of LSU, Michael Brockers, Rick Neuheisel, also his, as a college football analyst, his comments on Lane Kiffin, you're going to hear that coming up as well. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite Seattle Seahawks, riding with the New England Patriots as the underdog, building one last same-game parlay, this is the game that everyone has been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and to make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. If you win, make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season's over, y'all. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever just to hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person, or you can connect online. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. So, for a limited time, have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate. Get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. When Lane Kiffin was the coach at Tennessee for one season, he really rocked the boat. And one of the most prominent storylines was with a receiver named Nukeese Richardson, who ended up at Tennessee. But Nukeese Richardson was a guy who was being recruited by a lot of different schools, including Florida. And Lane Kiffin made some offhand remarks about Richardson and how he could end up pumping gas if he didn't, if he ended up at different places. And it ended up being a sort of negative connotation. Listen, Lane Kiffin went to Tennessee when Tennessee was down, and he rocked the boat. I mean, he was trying to get attention, which he's very good at doing. This was also 17 years ago now. A much younger Lane Kiffin, a Lane Kiffin in his early 30s when he was at Tennessee. And Evan Cohen, who now is the host of Unsportsmanlike on ESPN Radio, it's a national radio show on ESPN Radio nationally in the morning, relayed this story about how he was doing radio in South Florida at the time, was hypercritical of Lane Kiffin for those remarks. And Kiffin gets the job at FAU, and he's going to go on Evan Cohen's show in Florida. And Cohen says, listen, if I'm going to say something on air, I'm going to say this to this person's face or say it when we communicate. So he starts to ask Kiffin in this interview, and Kiffin gets the FAU job, about that Nukeese Richardson situation. Well, Cohen picks it up from there in the interview that we did on Radio Row, where he kind of talked about that interaction with Lane Kiffin when he got the FAU job.
I can't ask him about FAU before I ask him all the questions I had years ago about this situation. Middle of the interview, probably for him, annoying question after annoying question. I hear dial tone. Like, oh my God, he hung up on me. But here's the move he pulled. Called right back.
Love it.
He disrupted the flow of questioning in order to make it seem like I hung up on him. But then I can't be mad because he called right back in. And now my whole flow is thrown off. And I got to go like, all right, let's get to the different direction.
Is he so?
I don't know him at all. I know people that know him. I've interviewed him that one time, or maybe another time. I don't remember. I just think at some point you guys are going to get screwed the same way that everybody else gets screwed.
I have two observations to those comments. Number one, Evan tells that story, and Lane Kiffin, if that's true, that is something that illustrates Lane Kiffin being very smart and very savvy. The ability to think quickly on your feet, maybe be premeditated and almost conniving. I think there's a lot of truth to that about Kiffin. Talking to a lot of people that do know him, that he is a super smart and calculated guy. I mean, the way he navigated everything with getting Sam Leavitt and getting, a guy like Jordan Seaton out of Colorado, with the way that all played out, I think Lane Kiffin is think about the word Ryan Leaf used, genius. Like, we throw that around sort of flippantly, but I think Lane Kiffin kind of is that and can use it for good or for bad, if that makes sense. Almost like Anakin Skywalker. He can use the Force. He's the chosen one, quote unquote, and he can be good or he can go to the dark side. Like, I think there's some of that, and it's illustrated both there, because the other part of what Evan said is that he thinks LSU is going to get screwed. Now, I think you'd have to define screwed, but I don't completely disagree. Like, Lane Kiffin's 50 years old. I don't know that I believe at 50 Lane Kiffin's going to spend the next 20 years at LSU, 15 years at LSU. Maybe he does. Hope he does. Hope he does and wins a whole bunch of titles. But what if Lane Kiffin has the Nick Saban run? What if Lane Kiffin spends the next 5 years at LSU, builds the program back to a national contender, wins a national championship, and then goes back to the NFL? Okay. I mean, I'd be bummed if a coach wins an Natty and leaves, but we've seen that before with Saban, and I'd be super grateful if he did that. So I think you're going to get screwed, quote unquote, might just be the way that people are framing Lane nationally after how he left Ole Miss. But that is part of his story. I mean, the fallout with the Raiders was bad. He left Tennessee after 1 year in the middle of the night. He got fired on the tarmac at SC. He goes to Bama. Saban fires him before the national championship game because he was too big of a distraction. Ends up going to FAU. Everyone can understand leaving FAU for Ole Miss. It was certainly a promotion, but the manner in which he left Ole Miss, it's just, that's how Lane has managed his career. So odds are that is probably what's going to happen at LSU at some point. But quote unquote screwed, it really depends on the circumstances of how things play out. But I think most LSU fans would tell you, look, if Lane's in Baton Rouge for 5 years and wins a national championship and then leaves for something else, I think you'd take it. Now, Rick Neuheisel told a very different story of Lane Kiffin. Now, remember, Rick Neuheisel was involved in one of the more fascinating stories in college football this year, because Rick is a college football analyst, former college football head coach. His son, Jerry, who played quarterback at UCLA, became the interim offensive coordinator for UCLA, had an amazing run, including upsetting a top 5 Penn State team as a 3-score underdog early in the season. And Neuheisel told an anecdote about Kiffin.
Of course it will. Lane is a lot of things, but one thing he is a winner, and he will find he'll find a way to win. He called after that Jerry deal. He said, "I watched this video." He said, "You almost made me cry." Now, Lane and I are not close, but for him to reach out to me, and I said, "Now you know how Monty felt."
Yeah, no doubt.
Then he connects it back. Now I am crying.
Yeah. Oh.
I think Lane Kiffin is at a point in his life at 50 years old where he is probably the best version of himself. I'm not telling you that it's perfect. I'm not telling you he's a flawless human. I don't believe that, honestly. I think he's as we all are, very flawed individuals. But I think there are things that Lane does and says that are sort of cunning. Like what Evan Cohen sort of described in that soundbite a bit ago. But I also believe that at 50 and a father of children who are growing, and now at this point in his career, who's seeking that evasive championship, I think there are some really, really interesting parts of Kiffin that are very genuine and sincere. A man who's gotten sober and has found his faith. And I think it doesn't mean he's flawless. It doesn't mean he's without criticism or blame. But there are redeeming qualities there as well, and I think Rick Neuheisel illustrated one. Now, There's another part of Lane Kiffin that you got to know, and this comes from one of my favorite interviews ever. Former Mississippi State Bulldog Fred Smoot, whose son, by the way, is an elite 2028 prospect. You have got to hear this. We'll do it next. It is Locked on LSU. Your team every day. This is Mazda's moving the game forward for those who show there's more to the score than what's on the screen. Hey, look, the LSU women's basketball team played on Thursday against the University of Texas and came up short. But it's kind of how it goes on the hardwood. You know, you play a bunch of games, you're going to win some and lose some. But Michaela Williams has been nominated for the Cheryl Miller Award. She's a 10-person finalist for that award for the top player in women's college basketball. A top 10 finalist. Michaela Williams from Louisiana, who's been through the grind, great team leader, actually taken on a lesser role offensively this year to help the team elevate, because that's what it's going to take to win. Man, Michaela Williams is just awesome. And, you know, something like that reminds me of what it takes to raise the bar. It's the extra work off the court, dialing in every detail, giving it the extra fire, the grit, the never quit. At Mazda, they put the same passion into every model. Highlights make the reel. What it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. And thrilled to tell you about our friends at Our Lady of the Lake, championship health partner of LSU athletics. You know, trust, as we often say, isn't given, it's earned. And just like LSU athletes earn every point on the court, FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake, earns trust every day. As LSU's championship health partner, they take care of the Tigers on the court and across Louisiana. Players like DJ Thomas, Flau'jae Johnson, Jada Richard, Michaela Williams, they trust the Lake to keep them healthy, strong, and in the game. And it's not just for athletes. From sports medicine to pediatrics, heart care to recovery, Our Lady of the Lake brings that same championship level care to every family they serve. Trust the team that cares for the team you love. Our Lady of the Lake and LSU. Together, we roar. Learn more at ololrmc.com/LSU. You know, there's so many opinions that people have about Lane Kiffin. Had a chance also to visit with former Tiger great Michael Brockers. Remember that 2011 team, first-round pick of the Rams, played the Super Bowl with the Rams in 2018, lives now in Houston, does a lot of media. Actually, was on Locked on Rams this year as well. Had Brockers give his opinion on Lane Kiffin.
Man, I think he's the man for the job. Obviously, his character, you know, his character, who he is, kind of like precedes him. But I think he's the one guy that could kind of handle this LSU magnitude where, you know, it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure being the head dog for LSU, man. You know, our expectations are very high, but I feel like he can live up to them. We already seen our recruiting class be one of the top recruiting class in the nation right now when it comes to guys in the transfer portal and things of that nature. So we got high expectations for him. We always do.
When you talk about recruiting, though, this is the soundbite that you're going to love. Now, if you're my age or older, you know who Fred Smoot is. Fred Smoot was a great defensive back at Mississippi State in the late 90s, went to the Washington Redskins, also played for the Minnesota Vikings. Smoot was a dominant college defensive back, and he's the guy that runs his mouth, that would never shut up, that would talk trash. And by the way, he is a beauty. I love Fred Smoot. One of my favorite interviews I have ever done across any sport ever. And I'm not just talking about my convo at Radio Row. I've had a chance to talk to Smoot plenty of times over the years. Fred Smoot is so smart, so quick-witted, so funny, so unapologetically himself. He will say whatever he thinks and doesn't care who he pisses off. Fred Smoot is awesome. Well, Fred Smoot's son, Caleb Smoot, they live in Virginia, is a 2028 receiver, had 16 touchdowns in the highest classification this year as a sophomore. And his dream school is LSU, by the way. And so I was sitting down with Smoot on Radio Row at SEC Football Media Days, and I asked him, not about Caleb, but I asked him about Lane Kiffin And this is the conversation that led to Smoot talking about his son.
Like, this is what I love about Lane. If Lane Kiffin come in your living room with your mom and dad, he leaving with the child. Like, that's who he is. Like, Lane has that type of aura to him. Brian Carey had the aura of a snail. He didn't have a chance to come recruit my kids or nobody else's kids. By the way, I might be sending y'all a Smoot. I would hate to see a Smoot with an LSU jersey on, but I might. My son is one of the top receivers in Virginia. He only in the 10th grade. He'll be
28?
28. Yeah, he'll be one of the top receivers in class 28.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Dude, I would love it if Fred Smoot's kid. He's got to go. All right, you got to go. They're telling you got to go. All right, so your son's coming to Baton Rouge.
I didn't say that.
All right, Fred Smoot. No. His junior? What's his name?
His name Caleb Smoot. But what I'm saying is
Caleb Smoot, class of 28, LSU Tigers. You heard it here first. Break the news.
Hey, a pair of lips will tell a lie.
Hey, Lane, clip this. Tag Lane. Fred Smoot's son wants to come to LSU for the class of 28.
That is his dream school. I can't hate on him. That's his dream school.
Fred Smoot said his son's dream school is LSU. By the way, we did clip that. We did tag Lane Kiffin, and Lane Kiffin did not only retweet it, he quote tweeted it and tagged the official Mississippi State football Twitter account. That is why Lane Kiffin is a one of one. He is the guy that when he's on your side, you love him. When he is not on your side, you absolutely loathe him, which is why every Ole Miss person right now hates him when 3 months ago they wanted to give him a lifetime contract and build him a statue. Fred Smoot. Fred Smoot's kid to LSU. Let's go. All right, it's going to do it for us here on today's episode of Locked on LSU. Do me a favor. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. Podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review, and be sure to let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU. It's your team every day.